All right, well, welcome to week 5. This is lecture 1. Let me give you a little bit of a background here as to what's going to happen over the course of the next 2 weeks. In this week, we're going to have a set of lectures. It'll be 5 lectures that we'll look at for this week that you'll respond on tomorrow, which is Wednesday. And then next week, what we're looking at is you're just going to reflect on the appreciative inquiry videos. And there won't be any lectures because we've been pretty heavy in terms of both content and assignments. And so I want to give you an opportunity to really lean in and work through anything that's sort of lingering out there, things that you might be working on as far as your final project. I want to give you a bit of space. And then both in week 7 and 8, we will return back to sets of lectures that I think will be helpful for us to finish out this course. So I just wanted to give us a little chance to breathe a little bit before we get too far into this. We're going to continue on in our discussion about missional leadership. I think this has been a good and healthy conversation thus far. I appreciated your posts from last week, and I think we're going to continue this conversation. There was a lot of pieces that you brought up that I think were important that hopefully within the context of this week's lectures will address at some level. I want to start off with the character of the leader. I've had an executive coach for the last several years, and it's been a really helpful thing for me. He was a hard charging corporate exec at Caterpillar, and the question might be asked is how does a Caterpillar executive form and shape the leadership capacity of a pastor, especially given my contemplative nature and things I've talked about with Henry Nouwen and Richard Rohr and those that fall within that strain. And this is the idea, and I think Brandon brought it up in his post that I really enjoyed reading, which is this word synthesis, is that there is a synthesis behind the contemplative approach to life and leadership alongside of the developmental approach that I think that comes from what we can learn from those who have led at high levels, who have helped move people from one place to another place, and what they've learned along life's journey. Now, this was a deeply devoted Christian businessman who had risen in the levels and the ranks of Caterpillar, which is that corporation that makes all the really big machinery. And so I had the privilege of sitting down with him often and reflecting upon my own leadership, having him challenge me at some key places along the way, forcing me to have to rethink why I make certain decisions and how I'm shaping the lives of those that are within my circle of influence, and the ways in which I'm holding them accountable, the ways in which we develop goals and systems and approaches to planning and development. But one of the questions that I asked him at one point was, what do you see as being the necessary characteristics for a leader? And for me, as he was talking about his necessary attributes, values, characteristics, character traits for a leader, I thought these work really well in terms of what we've been talking about as far as missional leadership goes. The first of which he wants to point at, and I think this is one that comes back around him over and over again, is this idea of integrity. Integrity, I think, sets the tone for much of our leadership. The ability to stay true to who we are, committed to what we are committed to, without breaching the character that represents faithfully who we believe Christ to be in this world. And I think that's a really important dynamic in terms of our leaders. We can't hope to move anyone anywhere if they don't feel like they can trust us. He said one time, and I think this is a valuable statement, he says, one oops can wipe away 1,000 attaboys. And I think that sticks, that lands, that we can have been faithful in doing the work, but we have one big mistake or one big foul up, or we betray the confidence of someone, or backstab someone in our leadership organization, or we betray the values that we've committed ourselves to. And that ripples through our capacity to lead well. And so for me, I think what we want to start out with in terms of talking about the kind of change, because we're going to be talking a lot about change this week, the type of changes we might need to bring into congregational care and development, is going to be shaped by their ability to trust that we are who we say we are, that we live authentically, that we live faithfully, that we live out of our genuineness, that we don't put on masks of trying to impress people or compete or live out of our insecurities, but that instead we live out of this sense of integrity. And when I think about integrity, I think about integrity not only in terms of doing what is right when no one is looking. I also think about in terms of when you're building a house, you've got to lay a proper foundation because you've got to have structural integrity. It's got to hold the weight of the building. And for me, that's a lot of what integrity means as well. Integrity is the capacity for our lives to hold the weight of whatever it is that we are engaged in, whatever we're developing, whatever change we're bringing to an organization. So integrity is the first element or characteristic that he wants to point at. The second one, I would say, is vision. For him, and I think for me, and I think as we talk about missional leadership, recognizing that we aren't in a collaborative approach and we want to make sure that we cultivate vision within the context of our community of faith. And we're going to talk a little bit, I'm going to give you a specific example from my personal leadership that demonstrates that sort of collaborative leadership and what that looks like. But I think for any leader, there has to be a sense of vision, meaning that we can't get so immersed in the whirlwind of urgency and activities that surrounds us every day that we lose the capacity to see beyond where we are right now to where we need to be. And that will be essential. And oftentimes, it is the leader who at least serves as the catalyst for vision. Because many of our people are wrapped up in their daily activities, their daily lives. Their time is being shaped by any number of things pulling at them. And I think Riley pointed at that in one of her one of her posts. She said, I have people who are willing to give money, but what about time? And I think that has to do with a sense of vision for life. People just get immersed in their own daily activities, and they don't have the ability to step back, pull back, and see beyond where they are. And I think that is the key for us as leaders, is we have to build into our lives the capacity and the rhythm to be able to step back, pull back, and to envision where we could be or where we need to be, or what our involvement and investment needs to be as it extends into the communities that are around us. And so integrity is one, and then vision, the capacity to see beyond where you are, to see where God is leading or God is directing, or serve as that catalyst for that vision that needs to then happen collaboratively and corporately. And then the third characteristic that I think is huge for this in terms of what we talk about in missional leadership is courage. Cowardice and taking the exit ramps of leadership will find its way into your life consistently, or the temptation of it will find its way into your life consistently. When you begin to ask the questions that we asked last week, this idea of what is the cost, you're going to be facing this very moment, this very reality, because you will find that it's much safer, much more comfortable, much more secure to just hold the line on the status quo. It just costs less. And if you're going to if I'm going to follow someone, or if I'm going to believe that someone has the capacity to lead me missionally, they have to demonstrate the courage to make the hard decisions even when no one else would want to make it. That's what leadership is. Leadership is often about making the decisions that no one else wants to make because they don't want to have to deal with the consequences of making those decisions. Leadership steps out on the edge and at times has the courage to make the decisions, to call into account, to hold people accountable, to have hard conversations of radical candor. And that's a book that I read that I love the terminology. This radical candor, this ability to talk in ways that are meaningful and direct and intentional to the people that we're trying to develop and coach through this journey of leadership. I think courage is requisite. And I'm going to tell you, it's really tough, and it puts you on your face, and you're going to be praying a lot, and you're going to have to make hard calls that no one else is going to want to have to make. And if you wait for someone to have to make them, they'll never happen. There's going to be a moment where in the development of a missional mindset within your congregation, someone's going to challenge you, and you're going to have to decide, am I going to hold the line or am I going to bow to the pressure? I remember when I moved into this small rural church, and I'm going to talk about it in a little bit, in this small rural community, we had this lady who was coming to the church whose presence was a bit disruptive. She didn't look like, seem like, act like anybody else in the congregation. My congregation was completely white. She was this former black prostitute who had followed me from the town that I was in to the town that I had now moved into because she had family there, and I was the one that had baptized her and invested in my life in her, and she came out one day in the midst of a service. We were asking for prayer requests that her HIV had turned into full-blown AIDS, and we had one established family who was very uncomfortable with her presence, and basically challenged me about her being there, and really maybe the safety of her being there. And I had to make the decision at that point: am I going to hold the line in being the place for those who are disconnected from Jesus, for those who find themselves on the margins, or am I going to cater to the pressures of knowing that somebody, an influential family that I have, could potentially end up walking out? You have to be able to navigate that space, and there's opportunities for cowardice and exit ramps for leadership constantly as you lean in missionally. So integrity, vision, courage. And the next one he says, and I think this is beautiful, is this idea of compassion. Now, this might sound odd coming from a corporate executive at Caterpillar, but not if you knew this guy. This guy knew, he operated an entire plant, one of the biggest plants in all of the United States for Caterpillar and globally. And he knew the name of every one of his employees. He knew their families. He showed up for them. If they had a death in the family, he showed up at their funerals. He would stand on the line and ask them questions about their lives. He would invest in those moments where he recognized that somebody was dealing with some really hard and difficult stuff. To be a missional leader means that you're relationally invested, means that you're standing with and alongside and among not only the community outside of you, but also the community that you find yourself in. Because if you're going to equip and empower the people of the church to go out and serve the community for the sake of God, those people in the church need to know that you've got their back, that you're caring for them, that you're invested in them. This is what I call missional care. Too often, pastoring turns into simply chaplaincy, this idea that I'm just there to nurture those who are already there. No, I think you can be a missional change agent in a congregation and still extend shepherding care to your people out of a sense of compassion, of coming alongside and investing in and caring for, so that they know as you care for them, that they can invest themselves in the community outside of them. And then this idea of the compassion for the community, right? This idea that, does my heart break for the very things that breaks God's heart? And I think that becomes another important question. So we're looking at integrity, we're looking at vision, we're looking at courage, we're looking at compassion. And the fifth one I would add here is a sense of humility. We have to bear within our lives this sense of humility, that we might not always get it right, that we might not always make the right decision, that at some points, in some places, in some moments, I have to defer to those who are around me that may have a greater sense of expertise in an area than I do. I've had to do this over and over in my journey as we were moving into this missional sort of framework within the last church that I was in. We were extending multiple campuses, multiple different trajectories for ministry, and our budgeting became extremely complicated. And honestly, that is just not my sweet spot. And but on my team, I had 3 leaders who had operated at a high level in the financial sector, and they wanted to reinvent sort of our budgeting system that I was uncomfortable with because I didn't understand it. And I had to recognize that they had the capacity, they had the knowledge and the know-how to do it, and I needed to take the role of learner. So I needed to come alongside and learn from them as they were doing what they do best. And so I had to acknowledge, like, I don't have the answers, and I had to even say to my staff, what they're implementing, I'm still trying to figure out. And I had to display, I think at levels, an uncomfortable amount of humility to recognize that in a moment where I think I should know, I don't know, and I have to defer to those who sometimes do. But that humility to acknowledge when you're not right, when you make the wrong call, to be able to back up and punt when you've tried something and it's failed extremely poorly, when you have those leaders around you who are better in certain areas than you are, and you have to empower them, and you can't compare yourself or lose a sense of confidence or live out of your insecurities. So humility is a part of that as well. So I wanted to take this particular lecture and share with you what I believe to be the characteristics of a missional leader: integrity, vision, courage, compassion, and humility. And we're going to talk about how this plays itself out in a very unique experience that I had in terms of bringing change to a local congregation. And so that will be in lecture 2.